When we talk about death, we often refer to our final resting place. But so many of us are afraid that we might really just be resting when they try to put us in the ground. It's a little bit thrilling to read about exhumed bodies found with long beards or their hands raised up, palms up as they attempted to escape their doom. But it's also our worst nightmare. This is the true crime story of one woman who texted from beyond the grave, and the safety coffins you might want to consider if this is your biggest fear. Hi friends, I'm Katie, and this is Katie Does Crime. Thank you so much for joining me today, and if you'd like to support the channel, you'll find a link to my Patreon in the description. Today's case begins in 2011 when Leslie Emerson contracted bowel cancer and died much too soon at only 58 years old. Her family in South Shields, on the northeastern side of England, buried her with a few of her favorite things. And since she was one of those newfangled grandmas who loved to text, one of the things they buried her with was her cell phone. Leslie's granddaughter, Sherry, continued to text her grandmother's phone from time to tell her the family news and maintain a sort of connection to help with the grieving process. It gave the 22-year-old some comfort after having only months to deal with the untimely demise of her beloved gran. For 3 years, Sherry sent her grandma a weekly text without a second thought. Until one day, when she received a reply back, seemingly from beyond the grave. After sending her grandmother a text with just the usual recap of her life, she got a message that read, "I'm watching over you and it's all going to get better. Just push through." Sherry said she went cold. Her first thought was that somehow her grandma was still alive. Her next thought was that someone had dug up her grandma's casket and stolen her phone. She was horrified at the different things running through her head. As horrified as someone would be to go grave robbing for gold and jewels and come up with a used cell phone and Granny's final unfinished cross-stitch project. Either way, it seemed something was afoot, and Sherry demanded that the identity theft reveal their true self. They only replied that they were a disturbing vegetarian. But Sherry and her family were not amused, and her uncle called the number to confront the person. It turned out to be someone who had innocently been given the number by their cell phone carrier weeks before and had assumed that the texts were a prank. He thought that his friends had gotten the new digits and were joking around with him, the disturbing vegetarian. He apologized and said that he thought he was only playing along with the hoax. Apparently, Grandma Leslie's family had contacted her carrier when she died and offered to pay to be able to keep her number, but they assured the grieving relatives that there was no need, that the number would be destroyed. Instead, it was sold to another company and given to the vegetarian. Despite the apology from the carrier, Leslie's granddaughter says that the damage has been done, and it makes her feel sick. Now, I can't imagine how scary and confusing this text from beyond was for this family in England, but it got me thinking about how interesting it is that families are choosing to bury their loved ones with their phones these days. I mean, hey, my cell phone is one of my favorite possessions too, and if it helps me get to pass my time in the afterlife with a little Candy Crush and a Spotify playlist full of ghostly Halloween songs, all the better. But I also wonder if in the back of our minds, we lay our relatives to rest with their phones because so many of us fear being buried alive. Taphophobia, as it's called, is specifically being afraid of being mistaken for dead and accidentally buried alive. And although there's really no way to know how many people this happens to, we love to scare ourselves with the myths and legends about them. In the 17th century, when plagues and poxes were all the rage and we were still curing diseases using leeches, it was much easier to see a person who had collapsed and say, probably dead, put him in the ground.
Bring out today's one. Ninepence. I'm not dead. What? He says he's not dead? Yes, he is. I'm not.
One British businessman started the London Association for the Prevention of Premature Burial and used medical sources from the time to make a list of historical offenses. 219 cases of people barely escaping premature burial, 149 cases of actually being prematurely buried, 10 cases of accidental dissection before death, and 2 cases of starting to embalm someone who was still alive. Small numbers, but enough to make important dudes in history think twice. Chopin, the composer from Poland, had his heart cut out and returned to his homeland. His last words were, "Swear to make them cut me open so that I won't be buried alive." And because he had his heart preserved, researchers were able to figure out 150 years later that it was a swelling of the heart that caused his death. George Washington said he wanted his body on display for 3 days after his apparent death, just in case. And Hans Christian Andersen, author of The Little Mermaid, asked that his veins be cut open after his death to seal the deal. There's a ghost story that's passed around down south here in the US about a little girl who was buried alive in her family's mausoleum. The details vary from storyteller to storyteller, but in one version, she's the daughter of a local cotton plantation owner on the wetlands of Edisto Island, South Carolina. Her name is Julia Laguerre, and she's 22 years old when the telltale signs of diphtheria begin to appear. The sore throat, the fever, the swollen neck, the trouble swallowing. Diphtheria kills healthy cells in the respiratory tract, and they form a gray coating as they die and lead to a sort of membrane that eventually chokes the victim. Just before the Civil War, when our story takes place, the disease had only recently been given a name. When Julia dies in the summer of 1852, the temperatures in South Carolina are in the high 90s, so the family wants to rush to lay her body to rest in their mausoleum before decomposition can set in. Unfortunately, the extended family is spread out across the U.S., and it's several days before some of them can arrive. And yet Julia's corpse remains as lovely as ever during this time, no blackness nor bloating to be seen. Still, no one wanted to be close to a body that had died of a disease as scary as diphtheria, so only her father and younger brother are willing to carry the remains of Julia into the family crypt when the time comes. They close the marble slab door, lock it, and say goodbye to their loving daughter and sister forever. Years pass, and the next time the crypt is opened, it's for the coffin of the family's son returning home from the Civil War in the way every parent dreads. The door is unlocked, the heavy marble swung aside, and the rattle of dry bones is heard. Julia's skeleton is pushed across the floor from where she had died just behind the door, trying desperately to escape. She had apparently only been in a coma, mistaken for dead and buried alive. It's said that the family once again laid her remains to rest and locked the door, but they later found it open. They closed it again, and again they found it ajar. This happened time and time again over the years, until finally the door was secured with a heavy lock and chains. But even that didn't keep the marble from being opened. And then one day, the door was found completely off its hinges, broken into 3 pieces and thrown to the ground in front of the tomb, where it remains today. And if you look closely, you can still see the scratch marks on the marble from the terrified and despairing Julia.
I had to go visit the actual mausoleum, and here it is. This is located at the Presbyterian Church on Edisto Island in South Carolina, if you would like to come visit this yourself. And you can see it's not a very big room, and it's actually a lot more terrifying once you get inside of it. Once you see the walls are about 8 inches thick. It's made out of stone, and there's no way anyone would have been able to hear her pounding on the door or yelling or anything like that.
So yeah, stories like this were probably pretty horrifying in a time when mortuary sciences were still in their infancy and there was no machine to tell you when someone had flatlined. Enter the invention of the safety coffin. In 1868, a patent was issued for an improved burial case that had an air hole, a ladder, and a bell. If you wake up and find yourself buried alive, just climb the ladder. But if you're too weak from almost dying, you can just pull the rope to ring the bell above, and someone will obviously come save you. My favorite part is that the drawing submitted in the patent application shows a guy buried with the rope already in his hand, so just a little flick of the wrist and he's on his way back to a long, full life. An 1882 patent had a pipe from the casket to the surface for fresh air, but an 1885 patent decided that this passive air wasn't enough, and the presumed dead needed an actual fan forcing air inside their coffins. This invention also included a battery-powered alarm that would sound if the body's hand was moved, and a feather-covered rod on the ground level that would rise to signal that someone was alive down below. There was also a tube that was positioned right over the corpse's face, so you could hold a lamp up to it from above and look down to see if their eyes were open. Some tombs had a hatch a person could unscrew if they found themselves still alive on the inside, because sometimes you don't want to leave your rescue to the hands of someone else. You can still see a version of this in Wildwood Cemetery in Williamsport, Pennsylvania. Here, Thomas Purcell was buried in a coffin of his own design at the age of 83 in 1937 in one of 5 tombs lined with velvet for his comfort upon waking. And he thought it a very good idea to be buried with bread in case you've built up an appetite during your fake death. But for the truly lazy almost dead, there were coffins with feeding tubes, and one inventor showed off his miraculous design by having an assistant shove sausages and drip soup down his tube. Even in this modern era of heart monitors and embalming procedures that drain us of our blood, advances in coffin technology haven't taken a break. There's a coffin that houses a full computer setup with detached keyboard, so you'll never get bored while awaiting rescue. And a coffin that houses a two-way intercom in case your bread is run out and you need some fresh sausage crammed into your feeding tube. Ring the little bell in your safety coffin to let the guy on the graveyard shift know that he can put away his vampire steak. It's just you coming up for air. I'm sad to report that I was very disappointed to learn that the term saved by the bell doesn't have anything to do with coffins. The phrase actually comes from boxing, where a tired fighter who was about to get knocked out would be saved for a moment by the bell that ends the round. The macabre English major in me apparently wants everything to be related to death. Too bad. So what do you think? Are you one of the many who are terrified of premature burial? And would you like to be buried with a bell or your cell phone, just in case? Let me know in the comments. Thank you for tuning into my YouTube video. I'm just a true crime fan like you are, and I really appreciate you taking a chance on me. Please like this video and subscribe to my channel if you liked spending this time together. I'd be so appreciative. Until next time, I'm Katie, and this has been Katie Does Crime. And Sherry demanded the identity of the families are choosing to bury their love loves. Enter the invention of the safety coffin. So you'll never get bored while awaiting rescue. In case your bread is run out and you need some fresh sausage crammed into your feeding tube. Yes, I said fresh. What's the problem? Bah!